Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel, Scotty Cherie Reads. So I want to start this off with a little disclaimer that I am getting over a cold, and I'm sure that you could probably hear it in my voice a little bit. I just wanted to get out of bed today since I'm feeling a little bit better than the last 2 days. Today is Sunday, the 23rd, and I would have liked to have this video up today, but I'm sure it probably won't come out until Monday or Tuesday, and I didn't want it to be too late for y'all, so I'm toughing it out, and I'm gonna try to edit out as much sniffles and stuff as I can, but I am very excited to start this video. So I have some tea here, I have some water down here, and let's just get right into the details of what this video is gonna be about. Like I said, I'm really excited about this video because it is my first tagged video that someone actually tagged me in. I did the booktube newbie tag that I'll have linked if you want to watch that, but this is the first one that someone actually tagged me in, and it's from someone that I really admire, who is Kayla over at Kayla's Bookish Vibes. And her channel is great, and she's blowing up pretty quickly as well. So if you're not subscribed to her, definitely go to her channel. And basically she created this tag called Are We Compatible? And I just kind of gonna go through the different genres that I read and books that really spoke to me and kind of show what my reading taste is. And then feel free to leave a comment down below for specific genres or books that we're compatible with, and it kind of makes it easier for people who are finding my channel to see how compatible we are, and if I'm someone that we would generally get along with books or not, and if there are books that you see that you liked as well and we're compatible, maybe leave a comment down below with other books that are similar. And yeah, it's just to grow a bigger book community for people that like the same things as you, and to have people get to know me a little bit better since I am fairly new to the booktube community. So yeah, I went through my bookshelves behind me and pulled out a bunch of different books for different genres, and I'll have the videos spliced by genre. But to start, I want to get into the books that got me reading, or books that stuck with me from as little as elementary school. So let me grab those and I'll be right back to share. Okay, so let's start with books that got me into reading and things that I look back fondly on that kind of made me a reader. And one that I do have here, I don't have all of them, but with this tag, I'm actually thinking about going and buying some of these just to have for future kids if I choose to have a kid, or even just for myself to just show a representation of what got me into reading. But the first one that I can think of is The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein, or really anything by Shel Silverstein. A lot of the poem books and stuff I would read all of the time. And yeah, I don't know, this one just always stuck out to me, and I feel like the lesson of this book was great, and one that I would just pick up over and over again as a kid. I actually have The Giving Tree on the back of my laptop, which is cute. I get a lot of comments on it and stuff, but I think it's just adorable. But that's one that I can definitely remember picking up and reading over and over again. Another one that sticks out to me quite a bit is Charlotte's Web, just because this is the first book that I remember crying from reading, which was my first experience from what I can remember. And I loved the movie as well, so this is one that I look back fondly on for sure. I also was a big fan of the Boxcar Children series. I don't have any of those, but I would pick those up from the library at school and read those and fly through them. So I went through quite a few of those, not in order or anything, but if I could get my hands on any of them or pick them up from garage sales and stuff, that was a series I really liked. I also, funny enough, a little bit about me is that I was a major tomboy growing up. I hated playing with dolls. I hated anything super girly, but for some reason I did like the Meet Addie, I believe, which was the Black American Girl series, because they had the American Girl dolls people could go and they went crazy on. They were super expensive, but like I said, I didn't like dolls at all. But I think because the American Doll book series was so popular, when I saw that there was a child that looked like me on the cover, I didn't even care, because I never read books that I saw that looked like me. So for there to be a little black girl on this very popular series, I immediately read it and fell in love with it and would read that over and over again. So thanks to whoever wrote that series, because that was the first time I can really remember seeing a black woman on a cover and reading a story about someone who did look like me. So that was huge. Obviously, Harry Potter was one of my favorites and really got me into reading, but we'll kind of gloss over that. Kind of same thing with Twilight and The Hunger Games. Like, those were out when I was in, I believe, like early high school, so that's what I was reading. And then I kind of took a break after that once I got into college and didn't read very much more than that. But then I want to get into the next genre, which is horror, because this specific book is the one that got me back into reading as an adult, that made me a voracious reader. I do want to put in here really quick that I'm not going to be giving the full synopsis of these books because it would take me all day. I'm really going to tell you what I loved about it and why it sticks out in my brain and why I think it's a good representation of like what my reading taste is. So give me a second to grab some of these books, but the next genre we're going to talk about is horror kind of thrillers. Okay, so if you know me, you know that I really like horror and I read a lot of horror. I did want to throw in, I forgot to talk about Goosebumps. And I don't know how I could forget about Goosebumps because I loved the Goosebumps series as a kid. So I just want to throw that in this section. Even though it should have been in the last one, I just forgot about it. And that was monumental in my upbringing and my love of reading. So I was saying that when I was in college, I didn't really read like for fun because I had so much I had to read for classes that when I had free time, like the last thing I wanted to do was pick up a book. So there was a good like 5 years plus maybe of my life where I wasn't really reading. And then after I moved to Phoenix and I had a little bit more free time, got my foot under me and had my first real like big girl job, I decided to pick up It. Which I know it's really funny of like getting back into reading, and literally this is the biggest book I've read so far in my life. And the reason why I picked it up is because the movies were coming out. I don't know when the first one came out, like 2018, 2019. And my ex at the time was willing to read it with me, so I had a buddy read, and we flew through this. And this is what like kickstarted me to then always having a book in my hand ever since that point until now. And now I have a booktube channel, and it's a huge part of who I am. But I don't know, something about King's writing and the way he captivates like the small town feelings, and specifically for this book about how almost anything can turn into fear. And I don't know, just his writing is all encompassing. And I mean, not that he cannot do any wrong. Let me not say that. I say that a lot, but he has done a lot of wrong, and him as an author, that's a totally different thing. But separating the author from the work, we got to do that a little bit with Stephen King. But ending of this book, I'm not a fan of. If you know, you know, but I just think his writing was just so captivating. And then moving on, another one of my favorite books by him specifically is The Long Walk. I think he actually wrote this book under his pen name, Richard Bachman. But this book was just so interesting to me because the premise is literally just, there's boys that sign up for the long walk, and basically they walk until they can't walk anymore, and the last person that's standing at the end of the race or can walk as long as possible, they get like a shit ton of money and it'll change the lives of their family. And that might not sound very interesting, or like how would that fit into this, like how could he write this much about like that little topic? But it was so interesting, and it's one of my absolute favorite Stephen King books. I think that more people will need to read it, and this is one of his like underplays, or like one that isn't talked about nearly enough. So this is one that I really like and I push on a lot of people. Another like subgenre of horror that I really like is just kind of weird horror. And just to give you a couple examples of what I mean by weird horror is Mother Thing, which also, look at that cover. This is like one of my favorite covers ever. And honestly, anything by Eric LaRocca, but this one specifically, it says, "Things have gotten worse since we last spoke." With these two books, it's kind of a situation where I would tell people to go into it blind. Like, I wouldn't read the synopses, I wouldn't do any of that and go into it. There's a lot of social commentary, like this one specifically talks about like grief and mother-son relationships. It has paranormal elements, and it was really fucking weird, but also really, really good. And I think about this all the time, still to this day. And then this one has a sapphic relationship in it, and it kind of talks about like the obsessive compulsiveness of being in a relationship or wanting to be loved. And that's really all I want to say. But this one's really weird. It's really short, but these are 2 5-star books for me. And if you've read them, I love to talk about them because I like these a lot. Getting into another type of like subgenre is kind of psychological thriller horror books. And I think one that does this really well is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. And this was really popular because there's a Netflix adaptation that came out. I did like the adaptation as well, but I think the book did a better job. And I listened to this on audiobook and I was so immersed and like I could not put it down. I felt like I was there and it was such a good experience. But this one's weird. It's very like stream of consciousness, very intrusive, like you're in the people's head and it makes you feel really eerie, and that's kind of the horror of all of it. But then there's a twist at the end that was really interesting, but I would classify this as kind of like psychological horror thriller, and I really liked this story and think about it a lot, and I haven't found anything that's like quite like this, so if you have any suggestions, let me know because I really liked it. And then lastly, I like any book that has commentary on real world topics that are important to me, and if you can spin it into a horror where you take like real life horrors but then exacerbate that and make it into even more like a paranormal thing that's not real, I love that. And some examples of this would be Ring Shout by Peter Jelly Clark. So this is one that talks about the clans, like the Ku Klux Klan, but in this book they're like actual monsters and the main characters are like hunting these monsters. I feel like this is an example of what I was just explaining, of social commentary but elevated, and yeah, this was phenomenal. You should pick it up if you haven't. It's one of my favorite books ever. Another book or example of this is Tender is the Flesh, which is commentary on veganism, or how we eat so much and consume so much meat that in this story basically there's a virus or something that wipes out all of our poultry, basically all of our meat, like all the animals, but they start to harvest like humans and they eat humans. So yeah, this is an interesting one that sounds up to your alley. Like, this is something that I really like. This is a 5-star read for me. I love it and can talk about it forever. And then lastly, which is probably one of my top favorite books ever, like top 3, is Any Man by Amber Tamblyn. I do like to say this is one of my favorite books, and if you get to know me, this book is like me. Like, I love everything about this book. However, this is one of the most triggering books I've ever read in my life. So take that seriously, because this is all about sexual assault. There is a serial sexual assaulter that's a woman, and it's told from all of the men that she has abused from their perspectives, and it's just really deep, and the writing is so great, but it is heavy. However, I don't know how many books can beat this one for me in terms of favorites. It is one of my all-time favorite books. So let me know if you've read Any Man, and if you feel like you can handle it, make sure you do it at a good time when you're in a good brain space, but it's phenomenal. This is me. So let's get into the next genre, which is a couple of thrillers. So thrillers is kind of a weird genre for me because I do read a lot of thrillers, but there are very few thrillers that I give a 5-star. I feel like I'm really hard to please when it comes to thrillers. I lean more to the horror side of things. I do like them, but I don't know what it is. So I'm just gonna give you, I only found 2 on my shelves that I own that are considered thrillers that I gave like a 4.5 or 5-star. So to start with that, I have The Push, and I really like this book because I feel like I want to enjoy books that have like a questionable main character, especially if it's like female. That is a very common theme of unpredictable narrator or untrustworthy narrator that's a woman. She might be alcoholic, or is she sane, is she not, yada yada yada. And that's been done so many times, and sometimes it can damn near be offensive. It's like, okay, come on, women have been seen in this light for so long, let's do something different. But this book, I think, did it the way that it should be done, and it was handled really well in this book. So this is one where a mother kind of has a demented child basically, but nobody believes that her child is demented. And throughout the book, it's like, is the child demented? Is that child crazy? Or is the mom actually crazy? And you're just kind of going back and forth with that throughout this whole book. But yeah, like I said, I like that idea, but this thriller actually did it really well. So I feel like that premise, The Push, is really great. And then another one that I read fairly recently that I've talked about a bit on my channel is Bright Young Women. This was done really well. It was a thriller that basically talks about the women who were victims or Ted Bundy's victims in the past, and very powerful read. I almost feel like this can lean a little bit to like contemporary instead of thrillers, so it's kind of in between. But this is only one of my shelves that I'm like, yeah, this is something that I would definitely push out to other people and say is like a good representation of what I like in books. So that's all I really have for thrillers. Another one I can think of that I don't own is Home Before Dark. That's one of the few Riley Sakers I've read. I really like that one. The Night Swim was fun as well that I can think of that I've read. But a lot of times I feel like thrillers I just kind of read just to read them, and it's fun for the time being. I don't think much about them, so they don't ultimately become favorites, because for me, I like to read a book that impacts, or if I feel like a book impacts me, is that I think about it for a long period of time. And I don't really have a lot of thrillers that I feel that way about. It's like I like it in the moment, it's really fun in the moment, and then once I'm finished, it evaporates from my brain. So if you have some thriller recommendations, please leave them down below that are heavy hitting and that you really liked and you think would match my vibe. Let's get into one of my other genres that I really like to read from, and that is fantasy / sci-fi. So let's get into that genre. All right, so now we're in fantasy, and a little bit of sci-fi. I don't read as much sci-fi. Not that I am opposed to reading sci-fi, it just doesn't grab my attention as much as fantasy. But to start off, the first fantasy book, aside from the ones I was talking about earlier, like Harry Potter, Twilight, Hunger Games type reads that were really popular, was another very popular one, and that was Game of Thrones. So I did not read this before the show came out. I read it after the first season came out and really loved this book. I haven't finished all of the series. I think I got up to the third book, and then once I finished the show, I was like, F this, I'm not gonna read until I know the next book is gonna come out, and here we are in 2024 still waiting for it. But this was the first book where I felt like I couldn't trust the author because I would be connected with characters and then he would just kill them off, and it happened so many times that he just didn't give two shits about killing off your favorite character, and I hadn't seen that before. So George R. R. Martin's writing was great, and I really enjoyed this series. Too bad it's not finished yet. Another author that really got me back into reading fantasy is, lo and behold, Brandon Sanderson. So this is the story of anyone that's my age. I feel like Mistborn is what got them back into fantasy. Everyone loved this trilogy for justified reasons. I felt like with this, it felt like a pretty epic fantasy where I could understand the magic system. Even though it seemed a little complex, it didn't feel like I was working my ass off in order to understand what was going on. I was invested from the start. I was invested with the characters. I really liked learning about the world, and it was just so good, and the writing was just so approachable, but it didn't feel elementary by any means, and I don't know how he does it. That's why Brandon Sanderson is one of the most popular fantasy writers that's out right now, and he's leaving his mark for sure, but his stuff's really great. I'm still working my way through his catalog. If you watched my last wrap up, you know that I read Trust of the Emerald Sea by him, and this is like one of my favorites as well. This one's a little more on the fairy tale, like whimsical side of things, which is different from anything I've read from Brandon Sanderson before, but he did it really well, and I absolutely loved this book. I devoured it. It was super fun for that fairy tale-esque world. I'm very excited to continue through the series and eventually get to the Stormlight Archive because I have not started those yet, and I know that the new one's coming out at the end of December, so we'll see if I'm gonna start those this year or not. But yeah, Brandon Sanderson is definitely one of my favorites. Another classic that I read and really enjoyed was The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. And I think that the lyrical writing in this just drew me in. I feel like the world was just so beautiful. I mean, he writes songs and stuff in these books, and it was great. This is a slower pace read, which I didn't think that I liked as much in fantasy. I always was like, oh, I want fast paced, plot, you know, wars and all of these things going on, but this was a little bit of a slower read for me, but I really enjoyed it. And the only reason why I haven't continued with this series is because it's not finished yet, and we have no idea when we're gonna get that third book, but this was a 5-star read for me and definitely the kind of fantasy that I enjoy. So if you have anything else that's similar to this, leave it in the comments because I really enjoyed myself with this read. Okay, so a couple other fantasy books that I've read that I really enjoyed and I saw on my shelves are The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which is interesting because I started reading American Gods when the show came out, and I could not stand that novel. So I'm sorry, like, this isn't Are You Compatible, but I had to say that. So I'm not like a Neil Gaiman stan by any means, and someone told me that I should just pick this one up because it's a little more on the fairy tale-esque, whimsical, like magical realism side of things, and this became one of my favorites. I reread this pretty often because it's just a fun, engaging world, and I just love this story. So this is one that's definitely a reflection of like who I am as a reader, because this is one of my favorites, and I'm really shocked about that because I absolutely could not stand American Gods, and I didn't think that I was gonna like his writing, but I did. So The Ocean at the End of the Lane is definitely a favorite. Another surprising one for me is Legends and Lattes. This took the world by storm, and I didn't think that like a cozy fantasy, the way this was described, would be interesting to me, but I devoured this, and this was the most comfy, relaxing book that I've read. I still need to read the second one, but I'm almost hesitant too because I know people say the second book is a little more fast-paced, and I just like this one for what it was. High fantasy with low stakes. Who knew that I would be the one that likes that? But this is definitely one that I really enjoy. And lastly, I really like this next book because it informed me about a real world event that I didn't know a lot about, and that is the Poppy War. So I really like R.F. Kuang's writing, period. So I like R.F. Kuang, and we'll probably be compatible if you like R.F. Kuang as well. I loved that after reading this book, I wanted to go and research the Second Sino-Japanese War in general from what this book is based off of. I haven't really had that in fantasy before where it takes it from real life events, so that's something that I'm looking into as well. So if you have any suggestions, let me know, because this was really, really fascinating and love this trilogy. It was fantastic. So like I said, I don't read a lot of sci-fi, but a couple of sci-fi books that I have on my shelf that I could talk about right now is Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. This one was great because, like we said, social commentary about the prison system and capitalism and just so many other things that obviously we deal with on the day-to-day, and to put it in this sci-fi world was very interesting. I like the world that he built and the sci-fi elements that's in this book, but I also love that I can talk about this book and topics in this book for days and days and days and days. So this is one that I definitely really like. Another sci-fi book that I liked a lot was How High We Go in the Dark, and this is an anthology. Well, it's a collection of short stories, I guess. Anthology, I'm not sure if that means it could be one person or if it has to be multiple people, but it's one author for this, and it's not super big, but there's just a bunch of different stories in here that kind of reflect a plague that happened in the world and how that has affected the world moving forward. And yeah, it was really interesting, relatable to COVID, which we just went through, and it was really thought-provoking. So I really like this one. The sci-fi elements weren't insane. I felt like they were pretty approachable, and this is probably the most recent, well no, Chain Gang All-Stars was the most recent sci-fi book, but between these two, I'm kind of starting to feel out like what my sci-fi vibe is. So between these two, if you have suggestions, let me know, but I definitely love these sci-fi books, and they're a good reflection of what my reading style is. Alright, so the next category we're going to get into is contemporary, and I have quite a few to talk about for that one, so let's get into it. Alright, so for contemporary, I read a lot of hard-hitting contemporary. Like I say, that's kind of my tagline. I read from a lot of Black authors in this genre as well, so I'm just going to kind of go through a couple of these books, tell you just a tiny bit about what they're about and why I really like them. So to start, I want to talk about The Color Purple by Alice Walker, which is kind of a classic. This is one that I really enjoyed. I always liked watching the movie, and it was like one of my favorite movies growing up, but the book ended up being even better than the movie, and this was the first time I felt like I read like a Black, like sapphic relationship that was interesting to me, and just the love with the sisters and stuff. Like, I don't know, this was just a really great book, and it's a story that I am always going to return back to, regardless if it's the book or the movie. Luster is a book that I really like, and this deals with a married couple that kind of wants to have a third in their relationship, but it's told from the woman's who's will be in this weird sexual relationship with the couple. And yeah, I think this was done really well. And it was the first story that I had read that was solely about kind of like a throuple type situation. And I thought that was really good. I liked it a lot. It was interesting to me. Another one of my favorite books of all time is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. It's a collection of short stories that talks about the behind the scenes things that happen with women who were in the church, and I loved it. It's a naughty book, but it's really funny. It's really factual because there's mess in the church, and I just love that that's kind of thrown out in the open in this novel. So this is definitely one of my like top 3 or 5 favorite reads of all time. Another one that was on my shelves I liked is My Dark Vanessa, and this is one that talks about grooming in terms of like teacher-student grooming, and not only in the situation when the child is actually a child and underage, but it moves into when that woman becomes an adult and how this has affected her life in general. And I think that this was really well done. I think talking about grooming can be difficult to do, but this book did a phenomenal job with not only the aftermath, but like also the steps and like things that you can like look out for so that this doesn't happen in like real life. And it was phenomenal. A generational saga that is my absolute favorite, and I haven't found one that does it any better yet, is Homegoing by Yajiasi. And that's all I really want to say. Generational trauma, I think it's done the best for multiple generations, and it's in a pretty short book as well. This had my jaw on the floor. I think about this all the time. This is one of my favorite books ever. And lastly, I want to talk about not only the book, but the author. And that is, what I have here is The Death of Vivek Oji. And the author is Ekweke Mezi, who is kind of getting up there to be one of my favorite, if not my favorite author. They do messy family situations better than anybody ever, and I love that Emezi really challenges the reader with very taboo topics. I'm actually reading Little Rot right now, which I'm very excited about because it just came out this week, and that's really good as well, but also has a lot of taboo things in it, and I don't know. I like taboo shit, I guess, and Emezi is great. So if you want anything to like describe what my reading taste is, like Emezi is that person. So yeah, really, really like this one. Now let's get into some classics. I don't read a lot of classics. They can just be a little daunting, and I'm still kind of learning to think of them as not being scary from way back in high school and stuff when you didn't want to read any of them, and just the trauma from school in general. But I do have some here that are favorites, and there are some that I'll mention that I'm excited to read that I think will be my type of style of classics. To start with my favorite book of all time as of right now, and that is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This means a lot to me because this is the first time I ever felt fully seen in a book, and being able to discuss that with not only black but also white classmates when I was in like freshman or sophomore year. Actually, I don't know what year it was, but it was sometime in high school, and I always thank the teacher who talked about this in that class because it just made me feel seen for the first time ever, and to be able to discuss that and have hard, challenging conversations about what it means and what it feels like to be raised in a predominantly white space, or in my example, not necessarily this book, but being raised in a predominantly white space and being a black girl and what that made me feel like. Toni Morrison can absolutely do no wrong in my eyes, and this is probably #1 book of all time, and it definitely speaks to who I am. But yeah, that's one of my favorites. Another one that I read in school that I really, really liked was The Great Gatsby. This is the first novel that I knew was a classic and read it and was like, holy shit, I can actually like classics. I enjoyed this story. I'm not really sure what exactly captivated me with this book, but it was a compulsive read and I couldn't put it down. It was one of the ones where normally in high school you would only want to read the pages that you needed to talk about in class the next day. But I read this book in like one night and very much enjoyed it. It's probably about time for me to revisit it because it's been a little bit, but definitely have fond memories from this book, so it's one of my favorite classics. And then another author that I really, really enjoy is John Steinbeck. So one of my all-time favorite classics is East of Eden. This book was done so well. I think the biblical references and just everything about this book was done so immaculately, and it's a pretty big book, but don't be afraid to read it. It's exceptional. I think it was ahead of its time when it came out, and I just love Steinbeck's writing in general, because another favorite that I have here is Of Mice and Men, which is another short read. I read this one for school, but this is one that stays with me all the time. So I need to read more of John Steinbeck's books because he seems to be one of my favorites. I really like the way that he writes. Those those are the only ones I have that I've read that are like my favorites that stick with me, but I really like Greek mythology, so I'm gonna go back and read the Iliad and Odyssey and see how I feel about those, and read a bit more of that Greek mythology and Norse mythology as well. I think The Picture of Dorian Gray is a classic that I'm interested in reading. I want to read some James Baldwin. I think that would be right up my alley as well. So that's just a couple of things that are on my radar that are my type of vibe. Now let's go into a couple young adult reads that I like and see if we're compatible. Okay, so I don't have a lot of young adult books here. I don't read a lot of young adult because I feel like now being 30 and for the past few years, just the angsty teenager stuff I can't relate to anymore. So I just leave it for the demographic it's meant for, unless it's a hard-hitting contemporary that is something that is a little powerful and isn't talked about a lot in the young adult space. And I'm drawn to those type of books. And for instance, one that I read recently that I really love is As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. And this is a story that's very open about what it was like to be in the Syrian war. I mean, it's a fiction novel, but it expresses what it's like to be in a war zone and the feelings of wanting to stay and fight for your country or feeling like you need to take safety and leave your country and start fresh somewhere else. It talks about losing family and just really heavy-hitting topics that normally young adults aren't talking about, and that's what I look for in a young adult novel. So nothing that's fluffy, fun, cute. Like, I kind of want like hard-hitting things that bring up conversation that you normally wouldn't have with that demographic, and this is one that I think is done really, really well and is a reflection of me as a reader. Another one that probably everyone knows is The Hate U Give. Not gonna lie, like when I've reread it, there are a couple of issues that I have with this book. However, this came out at a time when it was needed and it opened up conversation about Black boys and Black kids and the police, and no one was talking about it at that time, and it was very much needed. So this is always gonna be a book that I think fondly on because it really changed the game and opened up the floodgates to have that kind of conversation, which was insanely important. And I think Angie Thomas did a pretty damn good job with it. Another one that is one of my all-time favorites. I know I keep saying that, and this is what it is. It's about compatibility, and these are all books that I really love. But seriously, I think Monday's Not Coming is another one that is revolutionary and like ahead of its time. Well, not ahead of its time because people should be talking about it, but I'm just surprised. Like, sadly, I'm surprised that Tiffany was actually able to get this published because it was raw. This talks about little Black girls going missing and how no one basically gives a fuck that they're gone. And the main character, her best friend, Monday, goes missing, and she's the only one that basically takes initiative to try to figure out what happens to Monday. And when you find out what happens to Monday, it was just like so sad. I cried in this, but this is a really heavy book, but something that young adults need to be reading and talking about. And Tiffany D. Jackson did such a phenomenal job with this one, and it's one of my absolute favorites, and I tell everyone to read this book. And lastly, this is kind of a generic thing, but when I was thinking about young adult, this author keeps coming up in my brain, even though I don't remember the book specifically, but I remember reading them and being really captivated with them in like middle school, and that was the Sharon Draper books. I have Copper Sun. I don't remember much about it, but I just remember fondly picking up all of the Sharon Draper books and reading these in middle school. So I'm interested in like picking this back up and seeing if I feel that same way, but I wanted to put it in here just to give you a little bit more information about me and like what my style was, because there was definitely a time where I was reading Sharon Draper a lot and picking them up from the school library. So now let's get into graphic novels, because I'm a graphic novel girly for sure. Okay, so I put graphic novels in its own genre, although there's subgenres within them, but we'll get into that right now. So for starters, the way I got into graphic novels was as like nonfiction graphic novels or like memoirs that I had to read. Actually, I didn't have to read them for school, but I saw them a lot because they were promoted a lot in school, and I'm sure that you guys have seen these. But the first one is Mouse. 1 and 2, which is a memoir about someone's experience through the Holocaust. And this is the first time that I picked up, this was my first like graphic novel reading experience, and I fell in love. Like, I love the representation in this book. And then I went and picked up Persepolis, which is about living in Iran during the revolution, and this was fantastic as well. So I've been in the trend of finding memoirs that are told in graphic novel format, and I really like those a lot. So if you have any examples of those, leave them down below. And then the first graphic novel that's more like fantasy sci-fi that I got into was Saga. And this was the first one that I picked up, and I didn't think I was really gonna like these. I was like, sci-fi, I'm not really sure. But my ex's brother at the time really liked these and said like he thought that I was gonna like them as well, and I did. I picked them all up and read them, and I've read these probably like 4 or 5 times, but these stories are awesome, and I don't want to say much. It's pretty much about 2 different life forms that come together and they have a baby in space, and these 2 life forms, or aliens or whatever you want to call them, creatures, they're planets at war, so they're on the hunt for them and their baby, and the whole series is them trying to escape and keep the baby safe. Yeah, I really like Saga. Saga is me. Getting into more fluffy graphic novels, I really like The Obvious Heartstopper. I have all of these. I reread these. These are ones that I read when I'm feeling a little down or sad, or it's that time of the month that I just want something cute and fluffy. Heartstopper is one that I really enjoy. Another one that I really love and push all the time is Wash Day Diaries. And this is the first time I saw a graphic novel with like an all black cast pretty much, and just friendship and sisterhood and what that means, and like black hair, and it was lovely. It was so nice. The art is beautiful. Like the conversations, like I felt like it was a good representation of how I feel talking with my cousins or my girlfriends, and how we kiki and stuff. And yeah, this was really well done and one of my absolute favorites. I wish more people would read this book. And then getting into a little bit more of horror, because I'm a horror girly. Uzumaki by Junji Ito. Anything by Junji Ito I love. Yeah, this was my first one that I read, and it was really interesting because it's all about spirals, and that sounds really weird. Yeah, that's all I want to say about this book, but this is one of my favorites. And then lastly, I have my favorite thing is Monsters. I love this writing style. I picked this up on a whim just because it called out to me, because it's on kind of like lined paper, kind of like if it was just normal sketches, and it's just beautiful to me, and the story was really good as well. And the second one just came out. I have that on my shelves, and I'm very excited to pick this up, but this is definitely one of my absolute favorites. All right, so now let's get into the last category, which is nonfiction. All right, and the last category is nonfiction, which is also one of my favorites. I absolutely love nonfiction, and you'll get an idea of what kind of nonfiction I like. A lot of times nonfiction I'll give 5 stars, because it's just, if I'm learning something in a fun, educational way, that's what I absolutely love. Yeah, I wish I read more. There's so many books and you can't get to all of them. So I try to read a nonfiction, at least one nonfiction a month, and I've been doing pretty well with that. But here's some examples of the ones that I really enjoy. So the first one that I think everyone should read is How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I feel like I should just leave it at that. This was phenomenally written. I think everyone should read it. You can see how many tabs I have. I learned a lot, even being black, in this book, and I think this just will make the world a better place if everyone reads it. It's engaging, it's not super preachy, it's awesome. So this is one that I really love. Another one that I read a while ago but still sticks with me to this day is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This just told me how pretty much like fucked up the science industry can be and research industry can be. Because basically there's a woman, Henrietta Lacks, who had cancer, I believe, and the doctor at the time took some of her cells and harvest them, and now like it has transformed the Science Research Institute for medications and everything, like almost anything you can think of, like for medications and stuff, like started from HeLa cells. But of course they didn't have her consent to do this, and the family is like poor as hell. They should have money from this whole thing, and they just never did. And someone took the time to research all of this and to dive deep, and it was just a really interesting read. So yeah, this is one that I really, really love. One of my all-time favorite authors, which I talk about almost every video, is Hanif Abdurraqib, and the one that I like the most is Little Devil in America, but honestly anything you pick up by him is awesome. He's just a phenomenal writer, and that's all I can really say. Like, I don't know what else to say, but the way that he writes, it's just so it's so captivating. He can write about a tennis shoe and like, I will read it, seriously. And he's the only person that I feel that way about. So yeah, anything that he writes, I love. One that sticks with me forever and ever is Know My Name by Chanel Miller, just like it has in the world. This is the woman that was the victim of Brock Turner's sexual assault, and how the criminal justice system did not seek justice really in this case. And yeah, that's just a really moving story, and the way that it's written was phenomenal. Another one I really love is Bad Fat Black Girl. Cecily Bowen wrote about what it is to be a black feminist, and how in a lot of feminist spaces this specific black person is not seen or pushed to the side, and she took it upon herself to say, no, we do exist over here and our struggles still matter. But yeah, Bad Fat Black Girl was great. I listened to the audiobook. It's awesome. And then lastly, I have In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, which is a memoir about her experience being in a domestic violence situation with a previous partner. And this is the most uniquely told book that I've ever read, and it's so good. Definitely like top 5. I probably have said like 10 books are in my top 5 throughout this, but I really love this. In terms of nonfiction, I seem to really like social justice books, memoirs, feminism, things that talk about sexual assault, sometimes a little bit of science here and there, as long as there's some other story that's there that'll keep me captivated. So that was the Are We Compatible tag. Let me know down below if we're compatible in like a certain genre and then maybe not in a different one, or if we're compatible all around. I'm just trying to make a bigger community here of people that like the same books that I like. So hopefully you got a little bit of a better taste of me and my preferences. I'll have some of my favorite booktubers or up-and-coming booktubers linked below or tagged below. I would love to see other people do this tag and to kind of get it blown up a little bit more for Kayla. I think it's a fantastic tag, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So other than that, like, comment, subscribe if you liked what you saw, and I'll catch y'all next week with another video. Bye.